I'm Connor Fine, and welcome to my TED Talk. That is, my theater history educational disquisition. Today I'll be tackling the subject of modern musicals and what stands out on Broadway today. The modern landscape of musical theater has a varied and diverse selection. Currently, the scope of Broadway has a few standouts lying among many jukebox musicals, works that put a plot to pre-existing music, revivals, which bring back older works, and musicals based on pre-existing IP, that's adaptations of movies, TV shows, books, etc. One musical that sits apart from these categories to me is Hadestown. It's a telling of the Greek stories of Hades and Persephone, and Orpheus and Eurydice, through music heavily influenced by New Orleans-style jazz and blues, and it's often considered a folk opera. Hadestown was the highest award-winning musical in its season, and the most Tony nominated, with 14 nominations, which falls just too short of the record set by Hamilton a few years earlier of 16. So why did Hadestown do so well with critics and audiences? I think the core of it comes from it being classified as a folk opera. The idea of modern opera musicals is not a new one, however. Many works in recent decades have been classified as some form of opera for various reasons. Rent and Jesus Christ Superstar are widely considered rock operas. Les Miserables is often compared heavily to opera in its scope, and is even fairly commonly performed in opera houses. And some have even gone as far to make an argument that Hamilton is a rap opera. The specifics of what unites these productions might seem hard to rationalize, but one clear thread is that they are all widely successful. However, to really understand the common factor between these opera musicals, we have to go back and look at where operas came from initially. The roots of musical theater are very much rooted in opera. Early works like The Beggar's Opera by John Gay are great examples of operettas based heavily in folk music that would go on to be the influence and inspiration for early American musicals. George Gershwin's Porgy and Bess comes at a somewhat turning point in the classification and distinction between musicals and opera. It sits on a blurred line between the two, with certain circles characterizing it as a great operatic work and others calling it a great work of musical theater. However, as these art forms progressed in America, the gap between them became bigger. Opera became more of a form of high art, while musicals and the musical comedy became more accessible, more casual, more focused on commercialization and entertainment. Broadway in the first half of the 20th century leaned into the musical comedy's burlesque roots, slowly separating from the operetta until the middle of the century solidified the separation with more widely appealing productions such as Oklahoma. Eventually, in the later half of the 1900s and on, we begin to see the emergence of pop operas, or musical operas, almost akin to neoclassicism in their callback to older styles with a modern twist. So, what makes an opera different from a musical comedy, and what is that modern twist in modern opera musicals? One of the prime differences in the art forms is the style of singing. This is perhaps the most obvious, with even the least musically educated people being able to tell the difference between the singing styles. There's been various research done depicting the specific changes between them, but even just to the listener, you can tell there's a difference. There's an openness to operatic singing. Operas are also not traditionally amplified, not utilizing microphones for sound reinforcement to help extend their voices to the back of the house of these massive opera houses. Another big difference is the adherence to the music. Operas treat their libretto and score very strictly, not often as flexible as musical comedies might allow. These are all stark differences between the two art forms, but there are other factors. One important factor to opera is the scope of its plot and the storytelling. Operas often tell incredibly emotionally charged stories. Whether they be heroic or comedic or dramatic, they often feature decisive characterization and stories that feel far-reaching and generally larger than life. This can be seen in operas going all the way back to its invention. As early as 1607, Monteverdi wrote L'Orfeo, a Greek telling of the tragedy of Orpheus and Eurydice. Sound familiar? Caccini set an episode of Orlando Furioso, a 16th century epic, to music and billed it as a ballet while giving it all the workings of an opera. Later in the opera's lifetime, the genre evolved, becoming more diverse, with comic operas and opera seria developing, with many opera seria, such as those of Metastasio, tackling conflicts of human passion through music. Those are all factors that I think come into play when considering a musical an opera musical. The traditional criteria the public might use is it sung through? Yes, it's an opera. No, then it's not. But I think the storytelling is just as important to that classification. A work like Hadestown carries on a long tradition of putting Greek myths and legends to the stage. Rent is quite literally a retelling and modernized adaptation of Puccini's La Bohème. Hamilton provides a larger-than-life rendition of the founding of a country through the lens of a lesser-known figure in its creation. Les Mis tells the story of a good man struggling with guilt and redemption and has many heavy parallels to the Bible. And Jesus Christ Superstar is the Bible. The connecting thread between these works is not just that they are sung through, but that they tell stories that are on the same scope and scale as one might expect from a great operatic work. However, they connect it all and enhance it with musical styles. That storytelling is exactly why I believe modern opera musicals are so regularly successful. They call back to the very roots of opera, capitalizing on the type of storytelling that made it so successful in its origins, all while maintaining modern styles, creating an all-encompassing work of art, and keeping the public appeal and entertainment aspect of musical theater. Opera musicals take all that made opera so successful and give it a popular, modern twist. Thank you for listening, and have a good one, everybody.